Welcome everyone. Welcome our audience and also our panelists. We have three esteemed panelists today. Jenny Rix, who is General Secretary of Fight Inequality Alliance. Then Dr. Kaiser Bengali, one of most known radical economists in Pakistan and also founder of several schemes which has been promoted all the time in different parts of Pakistan. And then we have Surya Devaji, who is a special rapporteur on development, on right to development, a UN special rapporteur. Now, this webinar is organized by Asia Europe People's Forum, which is a forum bringing the social movements together from Asia and Europe. One of the unique platform which is in existence for over now 30 years. It was a parallel forum to ASEM, which was a meeting of the head of the state of Asia and Europe, which they were meeting every 2 years. But now, after Ukraine, they have not met. So, but we have continued to bring together activists and specialists on different issues. Asia Europe People's Forum has six different clusters, and it has brought together some of the important social movements of Asia and Europe together. I am one of I'm part of Asia Europe People's Forum since 2005, and in Asia I am the coordinator of that forum. So welcome to webinar. And this is taking up issue of inequalities. As our audience would know, particularly the Asian countries and also the other African and Latin Americans are facing a mess of inequalities based on the policies which our rulers are promoting all the time, mainly new liberal agenda, which has put the life of ordinary workers very difficult. We have recently a peasant conference in a district, and we saw extreme poverty, extreme inequalities, particularly in the village areas where there is no social security system, where there is a feudal lords, and so on. So, today's topic of inequality, fight inequality, and social justice. We will be asking our speakers to speak on different aspect of this, and hopefully this webinar would be helpful to bring you further in your fight against inequalities. So I would request first Jenny Rix, who is General Secretary of Fight Inequality Alliance Global. She is based in South Africa, and she's recently been elected as General Secretary. There was a global assembly of Fight Inequality Alliance in Manila, where hundreds of activists, including me and others, were there. And there was a lot of discussions, and we discussed the strategies and the plan how to fight the inequalities and how to bring more and more people into this arena. So I request Jenny Dick, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Farooq, and pleasure to be here with everyone today. It's always a slightly daunting task when you're given a wide brief and you're the first person to speak. So let me just open things up for a few minutes and hand over to Kaiser and Surya, and then we'll get into conversation with everybody. So I think looking at the biggest question, I think, and why all of you who've joined the webinar will be involved in the fight against inequality. This isn't a new topic to you. It's not a new struggle to you. So let me offer a couple of thoughts on where we are now. Where are we across the world in this fight against inequality? I think, as Farooq pointed out in the introduction, we're at a time of extremes, huge extremes, in terms of the levels of poverty described that the majority of the world's population are experiencing. And on the other hand, we've got the specter of the world's first trillionaire, most likely being created in the coming years. We're in an age of extremes. We're in an age of extremes of right-wing extremism. All kinds of the systems of oppression people have been living under are are being heightened and are exposing the polarities that we are experiencing in our societies and at global level. So we are at a quite extreme point in human history. And the way I would characterize it, I think, as a movement, you know, the anti-inequality movement is growing. And I think it's because we're in this period, we're somewhere between hope and despair. So there's a lot to despair about. And I think we live between those feelings within the movement, that we have hope in our own organizing and the power, our collective power to create change. But we can't deny we're in a time of despair when we look at the daily conditions that many of our members and people across societies are living in, those inequalities, when we look at what's playing out, the genocide in Palestine, when we see the realities around us, when you switch on the news in the morning, there is that despair there. And it's this period in history, these complexities and that are giving rise to this growing movement that we're a part of. I think that's part of the reason why the movement is growing. You know, many of you, inequality is not a new struggle, as I said at the beginning. Many of you, it's centuries old, it's decades old. The roots are very deep, and it's multiple systems of oppression, of caste, of gender, of patriarchy, these different forms of oppression now under this neoliberal system that have come to an extreme point. And I think increasingly people are making the systemic links. It's not an accident that if you are living as a young woman in Sindh province, you will be facing more extreme marginalization than a wealthy man living in the city. You know, people are drawing the systemic links and understanding that there's a structure and a system behind the different inequalities we're experiencing. And one of the things Farooq mentioned, our global assembly in Manila, very typically when we have a chance to come together, people across different countries experiencing and fighting inequalities, one of the big recognitions that happens as people discuss together and share their experiences and their analysis is that people find so many similarities. Although our daily lives are very different, people find common cause because the root causes are the same. And that's why the movement is growing, because of the need to increase the people power that we push back with, and that there is a structure and a system in place that gives us common cause to fight together. And I think probably the final point to end on is, yes, it's a moment for despair, but I think we're at this juncture where, and the conversation I hope to have with the panelists and with you all, is where we want to take the fight now. Because there's moments of hope where we see people organizing, people pushing for change in Bangladesh, in Kenya, you know, victories we've been able to grind out at the global level on taxing the super rich, on unveiling the realities of the current system, the widespread people power that is pushing back against what is happening today in Palestine. We see moments of hope where people are rising, even when those victories are not working yet, because people are not relying on the current system and the current institutions to deliver for them. I think increasingly, you know, the organizing we're doing, people want to build alternatives, asking current power holders, decision makers nicely isn't working for us. So increasingly people want to build alternatives to the current system. And we're at an exciting juncture where a constellation of actors, you know, some people within those institutions, heterodox economists like Kaiser, many others, artists, other thought leaders, activists across the movement are interested in pursuing that agenda and seeing how we can create change by building alternatives to the current system. So maybe I'll leave it there for now, Farooq, and then hopefully we can get on to where we see that path taking the movement over the coming years in the following conversations. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for expressing a message of hope. although there's a lot of despair around the world, but there is also a hope that is making us more active in different parts of the world in a fight against inequalities. Thank you, Jenny Rix. Now I will request Dr. Kaiser Bengali, who is from Pakistan. He has been advisor to Balochistan and Sindh government. He is also author of Benazir Income Support Scheme, which brings some support every month to few, I think over maybe 50 million, maybe more than that. Maybe Dr. Sab can explain that. Also, he has been touring around exposing the outcome of the new liberal agenda, which has been implemented by different successive governments in Pakistan. So, Dr. Kaisar Bengali sir, please go ahead.
Thank you. My greetings to Farooq, you, Husnain, Jenny, and Surya, and to all the participants who are online. Thank you for organizing this webinar on a very, very critical subject. This is not a subject that is on the newspapers or the news channels on a regular basis. People tend to forget this. When I was at the Social Policy Development Center, we published 2 reports back to back on inequality in Pakistan. They were both, and since then, there have been some work. I guess Social Policy SDPI in Islamabad has produced a report. But again, inequality has fallen by the wayside. I want to start with a quote from Mohandas Gandhi Sahab, the founder of modern India. He said that there is enough for everybody's need, but not enough for anyone's greed. Very, very pertinent to what we are trying to do. Also, we need to recognize that inequality and poverty is man-made. It is not nature which has bequeathed us. It is not God who has created this inequality and poverty. And I use the word man-made very consciously. I think we men are responsible for all the ills that we have faced before us. I think the point that Jenny made was where to take the fight from here. I think that's where I think we should be concentrating on. In terms of diagnostics, we have to recognize the various facets of inequality. It is interpersonal, it is interregional, intergender, intergenerational. Traditionally, we have been dealing with inequality in terms of asset distribution, particularly land, which continues to be a major variable in inequality. But inequality in access to education is also a major factor, because education allows people to rise up and move to higher opportunities. Policy is also a very important factor. Government policy. One policy can shift resources, vast amount of resources from one end to other end. So policy is important. I think apart from land distribution and education, we also need to concentrate on how policy is made, which is where neoliberalism also comes in. Pakistan land distribution has been attempted, but not really broken the backs of the feudal order that we have. There are a few hundred landowners owning thousands of acres of land, and hundreds of thousands of families who have no land. And I have also faced more than once occasions where somebody has come and asked for money because somebody in their family has died and they don't have the money to pay the graveyard. 6 feet of land they don't have. There is another factor in inequality is social stratification. Even if you give somebody land, a landless family is given land, and their son or daughter has some education, but because they belong to a lower class, they will never be accepted and always remain marginalized. I think these are some of the battles that we have to fight. This is the battle of the mind. Something new that has emerged, neoliberalism came to Pakistan in the 1980s, late 1980s. And we are told that the market will take care of everything. The state doesn't have to bother about it. But the market responds to purchasing power. It does not respond to need. So any sector of society that does not have purchasing power, they just have to pray for whatever they need, maybe in the mosque or the temple or the church. But society and the state will not give them anything because the market will not give them the market because they don't have purchasing power. We in Pakistan, as in elsewhere, I think Pakistan, we feel almost all my work is very Pakistan specific. So I will be basically talking of Pakistan. We have created two countries. There is the country of the elite and the country of the people. The elite live in palatial houses. If it's a 4-member family, there are 6 bedrooms. They have air conditioners even in certain servant quarters. They have 2 to 3 cars per house. And the mass of the people, they live in one-room houses, quarters. Our research surveys have brought us in cities like Lahore and Karachi. There are parts of the cities where the average is 7 or 9 to a room. And in fact, some 20 to a room also families we have identified. They just use the room to put their stuff and sleep on the streets, including girls, including teenage girls. There is no privacy. The rich don't know what it means to travel by public transport. In fact, we don't have a credible public transport in any of our cities because the rich don't use it. The masses crowd as cattle in the buses, or they hang out of buses or travel on rooftops. We have created an educational apartheid. There are English medium schools, Urdu medium schools, madrasas, and of course, more than half the kids don't go to school at all. The fact that I can speak to you in English is because I belong to that elite class and my parents sent me to English medium schools. But I think we need to realize that our privilege is on the sweat of the people of this country. We owe it to them. Climate has compounded the inequality. I was a minister in the Sindh government during 2010 floods. I had responsibilities on ground, and what I saw is that the rich, they were not affected by the floods because their house was on high ground. Floods have been coming for hundreds of years. They all recognize which is high ground and which is low ground. And the marginalized poor live on low ground. Every time there is a flood, 8 to 10 years, their houses are washed away and they have to start from scratch. Everything is lost. And this compounds inequality and poverty. Religion is another divider. I have been studying India as well and Pakistan. I think in the 1990s in India, there was a very strong peasant movement. In fact, a peasant leader even became a prime minister in India. And the response was Ayodhya, BJP. So a horizontal divide between classes, upper and lower classes, was converted into a vertical divide, Hindus versus others. Whether you are rich or poor, whether you are Brahmin or Shudra, if you are a Hindu, you are on one platform and everybody else is other. We in Pakistan did the same. After the Bhutto government, which to some extent was egalitarian and labor supported. Came the Ziaul Haq regime with Islam as a, and we have seen, I have personally experienced, I think Farooq can bear witness to that also, how our trade unions split into Jamaat Islami trade unions and others. So I think religion has been used to compound the divides between the classes. I'll end here by saying that we need to mount a very strong campaign. And my closing statement everywhere is, "Aao bagawat kare," which means come, let us rebel, because it is only rebellion which gives us progress. You know, when Copernicus discovered that it is not the sun which goes around the earth, but the earth goes around, he was persecuted. And Galileo, who propagated his view, was also persecuted, imprisoned. They were all rebels because they were not going with what the conventional wisdom was. So we have to rebel. We have to rebel in every way. And the battle has to be taken to the streets. And I want to congratulate Farooq for the present rally that he has just organized in Punjab. But that is the way out. But the thing is that I think we also have to forge an intellectual battle. We have to identify all the factors of inequality, the sources of inequality, and how even individual government policy decisions can benefit one group versus the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaiser Bengali ji, and I totally agree what you said about religion is also contributing to the rise of inequalities, and we have seen here how mullahs just give sort of advices that you should be patient, you should thanks God whatever you have, and you should not really demand more, and land is God given, and so on. And I live in a feudal dominated area, and we know how feudal lords got all the supports from the religious extreme mullahs. So that is one factor in Pakistan also, which is really trying to hinder every scientific sort of discovery, and they oppose it. They oppose they said there is no corona, it can go away with azan, and so they were reciting azan in the evening every day. It did not go, and finally they have to go to a doctor, and so on. So thank you, Kaisarji, for bringing this up as well, which is a reality, particularly in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and also in India, to large extent, South Asian are suffering from the rise of religious fundamentalism, and the impact is that it's rising inequalities everywhere. So I will now ask Surya Deva ji, who is a special rapporteur of UN on right to development. I met him in Manila. I was really surprised to see a young man reporting for UN with the more radical ideas, and he was very frank. He was very straightforward, and he came. I I was thinking, is he really a UN rapporteur on right to development? The way he's speaking, but really, thank you, Surya ji, for your talk in Manila, and I request you to go ahead on this issue, please.
Thank you, Farooq ji, and it's a pleasure to join this session with Jenny and Kaiser ji, and all the participants. So wonderful. I'm not that young, but I think it's good to be in the company of very distinguished participants. Yeah. So what I wish to do is I wish to talk about three aspects. And I think I will try to build on what Jenny and Kaiser mentioned already. First of all, I want to briefly talk about the facets of inequality, because we are using the word inequality in singular. And I wanted to highlight that that should not ignore the many dimensions of inequality that we're talking about. And I think it's already hinted both by Jani and Kaiser. The second is that I think both my previous panelists mentioned inequality is not an accident, and Kaiser highlighted is mostly man-made, and I agree with that. And I try to build on that and kind of highlight some of the root causes, because we need to identify those root causes if we need to find an alternative, because Jenny mentioned about the alternatives, and I will thirdly talk about the way forward alternatives. And I was asked to mention a little bit about the UN, so I can briefly hint that, and then we can pursue some of these as part of the conversation. So in terms of the facets of inequality, of course, there are inequalities within the countries, but I think between the countries, inequalities are also very challenging. And they are increasingly challenging because of new challenges that we are facing, whether this is the digital divide or automation or artificial intelligence. I think this is going to create another layer of inequality, because who is controlling the technologies? And many developing countries have a significant amount of population, large unemployment rate and youth population. And the automation could potentially create their economies worse, because many people will not have jobs. Rather, the robots will be working in factories, and companies will have an incentive to make one-time investment in robotic manufacturing. Because once you invest one time, there is no fear of child labor. You don't need to pay any maternity benefits to workers. There is no risk of sexual harassment for now, and so on and so forth, right? You can remove a lot of workforce. So I think we need to understand that how new challenges are going to make those inequalities very serious in terms of between the countries, because who is controlling those technologies? The other inequality, and I think it was hinted briefly in terms of the climate change, flooding, is about the planetary crisis. And I will talk here about the triple planetary crisis. So climate change, environmental pollution, and biodiversity loss. The most polluted cities in the world are in South Asia or Asia generally. But why are they so polluted? And one explanation is that they are polluted because Europe is clean. All the manufacturing is happening in Asia. So the pollution of Europe and the global north, the share of the global pollution is taken care of by Asia. That's why we are polluted. I mean, there are many regions, but this is one of the explanations. And I think we don't often talk about these inequalities in terms of pollution. The inequalities, like who caused the climate change that we're talking about, who is responsible for flooding that is happening, and again, the loss of biodiversity. So I wanted to highlight those particular issues. Of course, inequalities are intersectional. I will not dive deeper into it because both Jani and Kesarji highlighted that intersectional dimension. Religion is only one aspect of it, but caste, age, gender, whether you are a migrant person, you speak a particular language, you are a person of disability or not, indigenous status, so on and so forth. These are multi-layered of thing. But the last point I want to mention about the facets of inequality is the institutional governance. We should see inequality also in terms of representation in the World Bank, in the IMF, in the Security Council. Both my previous panelists mentioned about the conflicts. But why are we not able to prevent these conflicts or resolve these conflicts? And one of the reasons is that the Security Council is a colonial institution, is a neo-colonial institution. It does not really represent the new economic order, new world order. Certain states have veto power, and they are using that veto power against genocide, against war, against crimes against humanity, so on and so forth. So that is another level of inequality we should look at, which is about institution and governance. Now, there are many causes. And again, I think the globalized free market economy is definitely a key reason for that. There is no doubt about it. But it is also about the historical colonization. I mean, if you look at the work of some historians, and I'm sure some of you may have read the recent books or even previous books of this historian who lives in India, William Dalrymple, a British origin historian who lives in India. And he has documented vividly in his books that how India was one of the richest country. And when I say India, I'm talking about, let's say, India continent, not 19 post 1947 India, but pre 1947 India, where Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, all these were part of, let us say, one nation. And I think the wealth that has been exploited by the colonial powers is very significant. And it's not merely that it has ended. I was speaking at an event a couple of days back, and I was saying that uh, British are still making profit out of it. Let us say if you go to a museum in London, what do you see there? You see the things that have been looted from the former British colonies. But we need to buy a ticket to visit that museum, right? So to see even our own objects and artifacts, we are paying the cost, and who is benefiting? The former colonial powers. So I think the inequalities are directly linked to colonization. And I think we need to highlight this historical connection and seek reparations and of course, full restitution and apology, in my view. Then, of course, we should not always blame colonial powers. I think the cultural and patriarchal values in our societies are also highly problematic. Whether this is discrimination against, let us take Afghanistan. I mean, the inequality that we see there under the Taliban regime, where women are excluded, this is shocking. This is happening now in this point of time, right? So you can't really blame always others. So I think we also need to self-reflect that some of the religious, cultural practices that exist in the global South, they are highly problematic from the perspective of inequality and of course, from the perspective of equality, I should say. So I think we need to look at that. And finally, I will say corporations, which are linked to this idea of free market economy. The level of inequality that has been created over the last 200 years in a very systemic manner, or even beyond, we can go even to British East India Company that was established in the year 1600. That is directly linked to the profiting by certain multinational corporations in the world. And I think that is where Jenny was talking about trillion and billions of people making money, right? So this is created by these corporate, and they're extracting everything from minerals and resources to the data mining that is happening now in social media landscape, you know. So I think that is definitely a major issue. Now, where should we be going? What are the alternatives? As Jenny asked the question, and Kaiser ji was talking about rebellion, right? So where do we go? I believe in the power of transformation. So I think we should be asking for something more ambitious, transformative shift and change. But I'm also conscious that that transformation or that rebellion may not happen tomorrow, or it may not be successful in each and every situation. So what do we do in the meantime, in the next 10 years, in the 20 years, until we achieve that transformation, right? So I think recovery of the state is very crucial. I see significant corporate capture of the state. And I think this is corporate capture definitely there, but I will also say the capture of the state from the IMF because of those conditionalities that are imposed. So I think the state is not an independent autonomous institution anymore. They are centers of power, both upward as well as downward, which are controlling that. And that's why the state is not really working for the people. Rather, the state is working for 2% stakeholders. Reform of international governance systems. I gave 3 examples. So the World Bank, IMF, and Security Council is absolutely critical. We may not think of conflicts in terms of inequality, but conflicts contribute to inequality. You just ask the question, how much was the military expenditure in year 2023? This is not my number. The number is staggering. We're talking about trillions of dollars, 2.4 trillion US dollars. If even 25% of that money is taken away from military expenses and invested to take care of children and poor in the world, that will be very transformative. So I think we need to reform these governance institutions. And I think because my mandate is right to development, I'm pushing for this new model of development. It's not people-centered development, rather I'm calling it planet-centered participatory development. So there are 2 elements here. It's planet-centered. So it's not merely that we do not leave behind human beings. UN is saying don't leave behind human beings. I agree. We should not leave behind anyone. And I think that is where Gandhi's talisman becomes relevant. The person who is standing last in the line, we should look at that person. But what I'm trying to also request all the decision makers is that if we leave behind plants and animals and rivers and lakes, human beings cannot survive. So we cannot leave behind others. And that's where I think the planet-centered approach of development is very, very critical. And it has to be participatory. The current model of development is very top-down driven, is benefiting only 1 or 2% elites in every country. So how do we change that to a system which is more bottom-up and participatory? I think that is there. I have some ideas in terms of the entry points for the UN system, but probably I will stop here for now, Farooq ji, and give you the floor back, and I can come back to some of those as part of the conversation. But thank you once again for facilitating this.
Thank you, all the 3 speakers, for your initial introduction and comments. Now we can start our discussion. We can ask our participants to raise their their hand, or if they want to speak, send a message. We can bring them. Husnain can bring them to speak directly as well. I've got a message from Rubina Jamil, who is General Secretary of one of the largest trade union federation in Pakistan, or Pakistan Trade Union Federation. So Rubina Jamil, you ask me to speak. So please go ahead, and Husnain, please allow her to speak here. Rubina? Rubina Jamil? Can you hear me?
Here right now. If he is here, can you please raise your hand, Rubina?
Or you can just unmute her and also start her video, if possible. Okay, okay, Rubina can come later. Maybe Wahid Bhatti is based in Amsterdam, one of our leading intellectual and activist who is running overseas Progressive Pakistanis organization. So Wahid Bhatti, please go ahead.
Yeah, you can speak now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning. Hello, Bengali Sahab. Hello, Farooq, Tariq, and Jenny and Surya. Thanks for raising this very important issue, and this is a fantastic discussion and insights you guys are providing. I just have one comment or a question, if you wish. Surya, you mentioned the word reforms. And on contrary to Bengali Sahib who said rebellion, and I'm trying to find not necessarily a midway, but really an appropriate answer to the issues you are explaining, because reforms are being done by everyone for hundreds of years. Even neoliberalism claimed reforms, and we see everyone talking about reforms. Yet every year we see the inequality and injustice growing and growing and growing. So those reforms done within the existing structures don't help. Actually, they are just, whitewashing. I mean, they just make us believe that things will improve if we do this, and if we ask them to transfer 25% of the military expenditure to some child welfare or healthcare and so on and so forth. That's not going to happen. We can, so those, and if it happens, it will happen within the existing structure, and it will happen in such a way that it doesn't challenge the power of the elite. So is it the right thing to ask for or to fight for, that reforms are ever going to change anything? That was my question. Anyone who wants to.
Thank you, Bhai. Thank you, Bhai. Now we can take another contribution, and then maybe our speakers can take up this question and maybe a contribution. Now we have in question and answer box Marina Malmberg from Sweden. She said that I would love to contribute my perspective as an expat woman who lived 3 years in Pakistan and did all the enabled development from the EU, yet was not allowed. So Marina, go ahead. Husnain, please enable her to speak. Marina, are you there?
Yes. Good morning from Sweden. Your Excellencies, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be a part of your conversation. My story with Pakistan is very long and perhaps could be a good book, in the end of the day. But I can say I've been traveling back to Pakistan in 2022, and I lived in Lahore in the period from 2003 to 2006. So I've seen Pakistan in different development stages, and I also seen political disturbances in 2022, and I know the root of them, but that's perhaps not what we shall discuss today. My perspective is on the social injustice and the right to development from the perspective of sustainable expatriation, which I tried for 5 years to push from European Union, yet I was stripped of all possibilities to do anything. And the main development of these outcomes was planned to actually anchor for Pakistan and the developing countries. However, starting a foundation in The Hague, in the Netherlands, I was not even allowed to open a bank account. And when I brought in a Pakistani board member, none of us were able to proceed. So this is the level of, let's say, justice we have today. It's not possible to do any initiative without having people of power on board. It doesn't matter how good is your project. It doesn't matter what it brings. Nobody really cares. Then the question to Professor Surya Deva is, I hope you remember our conversation from Forum of Asia in 2020, when I have asked you how did it happen that wives of expatriates of corporate companies are not allowed to work in the development countries by the national laws, And when we coming back to Europe, we cannot find jobs. And in my personal story, it took 18 years of being a dependent woman in Sweden after working for a Swedish company and contributing 3 years to the company in terms of my husband's service and work in Pakistan. So there is a situation when corporate companies put on disability pension completely able people in the countries like Pakistan instead of granting them a right to work. And as far as I know, after my consultations with diplomatic services of Pakistan, as a country, Pakistan never prohibited anyone from work.
Thank you, Marina ji.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that.
Okay, Marina, we can take those questions up. Now, I would ask our panelists to respond to the two questions, and then we can go further with the audience.
Should I respond?
Please.
To the...
Yes, please go ahead, Surya ji.
So Vaidji, thank you for the question. I mean, I don't see a conflict between rebel and reform, because what I'm mooting for or proposing is not simple reform tweaks, because reforms can be on a spectrum. So the transformative reforms that I'm advocating for are equivalent to peaceful rebellion. And I think it is important to understand that rebellion may not always result in better outcomes. Let us say we don't think that UN as an institution is fit for the purpose. And I am willing to buy this argument that United Nations is not fit for the purpose in this point of time. But I want to see the better alternative before I do away with the United Nations. Do we have a better alternative? And I think that is where I'm proposing suggestions which are pushing for changes, which are more transformative. And I completely agree. Sometimes there are structural issues that we need to grapple with. But there are not many success stories in the recent time about rebellion making transformative changes. I mean, we can look at the small scale. Let us take Bangladesh as an example. People may think that was kind of a rebellion. Is this going to make Bangladesh economy and leadership and the society transformative? This is an open question. I hope and I wish it does. But it is also possible that it may not happen because of many other factors. So I think my response is that we can push for more radical changes that you're asking for in terms of through rebellion. But until that happens, and until we are sure of better alternatives, we also need to look at medium-term solutions that will be bringing some changes to the current structures, which may not be the ideal solutions, but better than nothing. So I'm not going to support the idea of extremes, that either we continue with the status quo or we just go for the rebellion, nothing in between. That's my personal view. And of course, we can have different views and disagree, but that's my view. And I think I'm going to take that path in terms of pushing for more transformative changes. Yeah. In terms of Marina's question.
Can I just interject? I don't want to make it a discussion between us because more people want to ask questions. I just want to clarify one very simple point. I did not mean by, and I don't think Kaiser Bengali Sahab also meant extremism when he said rebellion. So rebellion doesn't have to be extreme, and rebellion doesn't have to destroy something, only destruction, remove something, but not replace it with something else. So just for clarification, rebellion doesn't equal extremism. And I totally agree with you that extremism is wrong of any sort. It should not be the case. But the thing is, again, we have been trying radical reforms, less radical reforms within the existing structure, and it has not worked because the political system protects or breeds the current economic system. The current economic system breeds inequality and injustice. And as long as this continues and within the same parameters, we are trying to turn water into wine or wine into water. I mean, that
Okay.
won't
Thank
help.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bhai. Thank you, Bhai Sab. And I can ask our two other speakers, Chenny first, and then Kaiser ji to respond to the two contributions which has been made now.
Yeah,
So,
thank
Jenny,
you.
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Wahid, and thanks, Surya. You've hit on, I don't know how we're going to conclude this in 5 minutes. I think we need to organize a follow-up webinar on this because you've articulated the critical question facing us as a movement, actually, Wahid. And funnily enough, just before I joined the webinar, myself and another colleague were discussing this exact question because it's the one we're faced now. You know, it's what came out of our global assembly leads us in this direction. Oh, I'm getting a bit of feedback from somewhere. Don't know if people's mics are open. Thanks. Two major thoughts come to mind. One, maybe we haven't articulated strongly enough in this conversation. I think the current articulation, the UN SDG framing of leaving no one behind, I think is a good example. It's not that people are left behind, they're pushed behind. It's leaving behind almost sounds like apolitical, like, oh, I was taking people somewhere and actually I forgot to pick up Surya and I left him at home. No, it's you're pushing people behind. That's how the current system functions and works. So when we're thinking about alternatives, our perspective is that they have to be built by the people most affected. You know, at the moment, we have a lot of different framings for how people are conceiving of the alternatives. We have a lot of different framings: new economy, post-neoliberalism, well-being economy, beyond GDP, you name it. I'm sure everyone in the group could name 6 or 7 other framings. Now, I would contest at this point, most of that is built in more global north and more elite settings. And so how the alternatives are constructed and understood and advanced needs to be more centrally driven by the experiences and the work of people most affected by the current system. So we've got a job to do now to reorient the conversation and enable people who are most discriminated against or most affected by inequalities in the myriad of very complex ways, which Kaiser and Surya did a better job than I did of describing. Reordering that's a big task for us. The other thing I wanted to say on the sort of reform versus revolution spectrum, if I can crudely, slightly unfairly characterize our conversation as, is, you know, we have a job to do on both tracks. I think the reality is people want changes now. If you're living at the sharp end of some of these inequalities we're talking about, some of the examples that have been described, waiting for a future system is not going to work for you because it's life and death today. So there's a huge demand placed on us to be able to organize to answer the things that people need to see improvements on now, wins that people want to see now, whilst not losing sight of having those changes, the way we organize and build power and the path we're taking. That's not enough. Of course, that's not enough. We're all agreed on the need for systemic changes, but we have a job to do to balance the need for change in the here and now, whilst still ensuring and not losing sight of it taking us in a much stronger direction towards structural change and alternatives. So it places a big strain on us as a movement to judge and to debate and to push ourselves at every juncture is what we're doing, taking us in that more structural, transformative direction. And that's the tension, that's the burden placed on us at this juncture in history, I would say. Thanks, Farooq.
Sorry. Surya ji, you want to speak first, or shall I ask Kaiser ji to respond and then you take up?
Oh, I think Kaiser ji should go first. I will follow after him. Thank you.
Ji, Kaiser sir, please go ahead. Kaiser sir, unmute yourself, please. Husnain, unmute Kaiser sir.
Yes, sir, your mic is on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Husnain, can you do it?
Yeah, I'm trying, but I just have to ask him.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir, there is a option of mic. Can you please?
Okay, I got it. I got it.
Yes. Please go ahead, Kaiser sir.
Gee, I think this question of rebellion needs to be clarified. Rebellion doesn't mean you plant bombs and assassinate people. It is the rebellion of ideas, I think, which is more important. And when I referred to, scientists and others who have changed our thinking, fundamentally, whether the sun revolves around the earth or earth revolves around the sun is, I think, something that was very fundamental. And so much has preceded and followed, which has changed the world. They were all rebels. They did not go by what conventional wisdom was. And I think that is what we have to do. Pakistan, since I'm speaking largely of Pakistan, the official narrative tends to make everybody a conformist. And the elite is very comfortable with this conformism because it suits them. I think that's the pattern we need to break. We need to question everything, challenge everything, but it is not enough to do it in conference rooms or in research papers. I think it is very important to mobilize on the streets. Without that, the walls, the corridors of power will not be listening to us. They're only listening to strength. They don't listen to reason. So that is what I meant by rebellion. And Bangladesh is not a rebellion. They just wanted to change one leader from another. That is not rebellion. Rebellion is when you want to change a system. If we would be rebelling if the feudal order in Pakistan is replaced by peasant proprietorship across the board. That would be a rebellion. Another point I want to make is that we talk, there is talk of reparations for colonialism. There is also talk of increased climate funding. Very popular that Pakistan contributes less than 1% to greenhouse gases, but suffers more. Whenever we receive, our governments will receive funding, either as reparations or as climate funding. Rest assured that in the present power structure, nothing will reach the people. It will only enrich the rich as a result. So I think while the one eye on the inter-country inequality is important, but I think more important is to address the inequality within the country. And that inequality is interpersonal, interregional, caste, class, caste, language. All this has been mentioned. We had a visitor We are having a visitor currently, a religious speaker who has been expelled from India, and he was giving awards to students, and he refused to give awards to girls. These are all 8, 10-year-old girls. He said, they are not mahram, so I will not give them. Now, this kind of absolutely regressive thought is officially promoted. We have to fight it. We cannot fight it by being very sort of gentlemanly or ladylike. We have to take this fight to the streets, and so that is what we mean. And we have to fight back the notion that the state has a responsibility for basic services. We cannot allow that to be arrogated to the market. And this articulation of this battle has to be in the living language. It cannot be in abstract terms. You know, you and I can understand what is meant in abstract language, but it has to be translated into language that the people can relate to. So I think this is essentially the battle is intellectual, but it has to be brought to the streets. It has to be brought to the language that the common people understand, examples from their everyday life, and only then we will be able to mobilize for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaiser Sahab. Now I request Surya ji take up the comments
you.
which Wahid has made, and Marina also.
Thank you. I think this is fascinating, and normally these things do not happen in webinars. You know, this is good, good exchange in my view. You know, otherwise we just say whatever we want to say and move on. So I think this is good conversation. So thank you for that. I think I understood rebellion in the sense it has been explained, I will say, by Kaiser Saab. I was not talking about bombs and violence. I was not talking about rebellion in the sense of extremism, because extremism could mean different things. It could mean, for instance, the religious fundamentalism as an extreme, or populism as an extreme way, or violence as an extreme way, but it could also mean extreme change. So rebellion for me is the push for changes in the structures of power. Systemic changes that needs to happen in the governance structure, in the economic order, in business models and all that. And of course, I completely agree that the push could be through peaceful means. We need to mobilize people and bring them on street, and that power is crucial. But whenever we try to do that at any level, that is not going to have a consensus. Whether it's Pakistan or India or Bangladesh or any country for that matter, Sweden, 100% people will never agree for such a rebellion. It has never happened. It will not happen again in future. And that means that the people who have that vested power, they will fight back. They will use the police force. They will use military. They will use whatever else. They will use social media to fight back against the peaceful protesters, right? And that would create a conflict, even if one side doesn't want conflict, even if one side wishes peaceful rebellion, it will inevitably result in a conflict situation. And then the outcome is not given that it is going to be transformative. It's not given that it will be better than what we have now. So I think that is the caution. I'm not against rebellion. I'm merely putting a note of caution that we should not assume that rebellion is inevitably going to result in better outcomes. Don't assume it. The process could be problematic, and the outcome need not be the better outcome that we are wishing for. I think we need to work towards it. The Bangladesh case, my interpretation of Bangladesh, Kaiserji, is different from yours, it seems. It was not merely overthrowing the government. They were also trying to overthrow the idea behind that government, whether this is about civic space, whether it is about inequalities and the lack of trade union movement that was suppressed, It was also about ignoring environmental and climate change. So I think perhaps it was not a rebellion of the same aspiration that we may look for, but it was not merely a protest to throw a government. It was also trying to overthrow an ideology, a system of governance that was there, and that was resulting in many people being left behind, and of course the planet being destroyed. So I think these are some of the thoughts that I have. Yeah, but I think it's possible we may have a different opinion, and I think we should allow that space of differences of opinion. And I wish all the success for those who are aspiring for rebellion. I mean, and I wish it happens. But I'm more, I have limited time and energy, and I'm going to invest my time and energy in, let us say, more transformative reforms rather than rebellion.
Okay, thank you, Surya ji. And
can
we
I
have
just
two more.
say this, Farooq?
Ji, go ahead.
Rebellion is not one-off, and no one should expect an action and then a response. Rebellion is a process that will have to continue. Transformation is also not one-off. You achieve one stage, then you move on to the other. It's never that night will turn into day overnight. So there are no extremes here. It's not that you come out on the streets and next day a result is there. There is a incremental progress is what we will have to find. But the challenge has to be, what is said that you think rationally and act radically. And that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you, Kaiser ji. Now I'll ask Andy Rutherford. He's one of the leading activists of AEPF. So, Husnain, please unmute, request Andy to unmute and ask her. He has written his question, but he can speak himself about his question of challenges at present time. Andy?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Farooq, and thank you so much to all the panelists for your excellent contributions. It's greatly appreciated. As Farooq mentioned at the beginning, the Asia-Europe People's Forum has worked hard to enable spaces for collaboration. We have brought together through our face-to-face People's Forums, often every 2 years, up to 1,200 representatives of people's organizations and movements from across Asia and Europe. This is a big collaboration. And all the issues that you've been talking about have been expressed in those forums. And the aim at the end of the forums is to bring together under a people's agenda for change, the different and sometimes contradictory wishes for how to progress to that change. And this has been an amazing and inspiring process, which has given energy, as Farooq will no doubt confirm, to people's struggles and social movements across Asia and Europe, basically knowing that you are not alone. That people are sharing your challenges, sharing your vision, and sharing your wish to contribute to positive change. We have worked at this systematically, and at the last People's Forum, we refined, I think it's fairer to say, a People's Charter for parliamentarians. This is a bringing together of all the demands and wishes and aspirations and dreams for a more just and equal and inclusive and environmentally respectful Asia and Europe together in clear demands for people's parliamentarians. Now, of course, as we've discussed just now, access to those parliamentarians is very problematic in many countries at present. But it is still a fundamental wish that the citizens, the active citizens and their movements and groups can be able to interface, to exchange, to present their aspirations for a more just, equal and inclusive and environmentally respectful world to their parliamentarians. That is how we have tried to do it in a collaborative way. I'm very, very interested and I've put a link in the chat my question to the latest version of the People's Charter for parliamentarians, and I encourage you all to have a look at that. Not you, the speakers, but anyone participating. My question is a simple one, and one that has challenged us forever and will continue to challenge us. How can we, in the context of the planetary challenges, in the context of climate change and the need for just transitions, in the context of growing authoritarianism in places and limits on civic action in places, and also the fundamental challenge that we have here of growing social inequalities, how can we better collaborate? How can we better collaborate to take forward our fundamental messages of the need for a more just and equal and inclusive world?
Okay, thank you, Andy. And I'll take one more question and then we'll request the panelists to respond. So Mudabbar Ali, if you want to speak. Mudabbar Ali is our coordinator of Fight Inequality Alliance Pakistan. And so Mudabbar Ali, go ahead, please. Mudabbar, are you there?
Audible now.
Okay, yes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Farooq Saab, and thank you so much to all the panelists who shared very insightful discussion it was. And I have a question from Mr. Surya. Since he talked a lot about the digital inequality and the inequality between countries, the first world countries and the third world countries, I think it's very far-fetched idea to talk about digital inequality and be conscious about what kind of inequalities can we face in the future, since the kind of inequalities we are facing right now at the moment are very severe. And I think global institutions like UN should have this important realization that how we can mitigate this gulf of inequalities between rich and poor. And there was a lot of discussion about peaceful protests and reforms and what can be the possible course of action when it comes to the people who are facing all these difficulties. So I think peaceful protests, as Surya Saab said, that they can be of they can be of some potential to bring change, but you said there is no such thing which can stop the kind of inequalities we are facing through these protests. I have a very serious question about the workers, the working force behind this system and the structure we were talking about. What do you think? Would it be possible to halt the system, to halt the structure, the meta narratives behind it for a moment, if the workers combine and together they forcefully they do some actions like they stop working and stop providing services for the rich? And would it be, you think, be a possible course of action to through which they can put forward their case and have some impact?
Thank you, Mudabbar, and I'll request our panelists. So maybe Jenny, you can start from here, and then the other two panelists can do. And after this, we will have just one more contribution from Safdar Ali. He has already written in Q&A, so maybe our panelists can respond to that as well. So please go ahead with Andy and Mudabbar's questions. Jenny?
Yeah, good questions, both of you. So a couple of thoughts spring to mind in listening to us trying to unpack the strategic dilemmas and are we understanding each other around how we see change happening. And I think it's probably healthy and inevitable that we're not going to all see it exactly the same, and especially in a first conversation, and there will be people playing, organizations, movements, different actors playing slightly different roles over the coming years. I mean, that's pretty inevitable for any broad-based movement. I mean, I see this moving forward on a couple of levels. One is and I think Kaiser spoke to this quite a bit, is the redefining of the ideas in the thought space. So if we can't conceive of a different kind of society and economy, different kind of governance, you know, the things that people want to see changed at a root level, both where they live and across the world, those ideas have to be transformed. And to Andy's question, probably a very partial answer to your question, Andy, is the spaces and the ways we're creating to involve a lot of people in the creation of those narratives needs to increase in the years ahead, where groups are finding common cause, common space to come together and do that. And as I said before, I really think the fundamental piece missing is at the moment is the centering, the inclusion of large numbers of people who are most affected by these questions. At the moment, I think there's an over assumption that if ideas are created in elite spaces, there will somehow be a leakage and an automatic dissemination to large sections of the population. And I don't find that to be verifiably true in most cases. So I guess the first thing would, the sort of, I'm reminded of the Steve Biko quote about the most powerful tool in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. If we can envision a better society, a better future, that's something very critical. Now, onto Mudabir's question, probably the labor part, then I think a number of strategies come into play, don't they? There's certainly a role for tactics like strikes, as you were alluding to, where workers can organize, you know, around on a class basis, ideally across sectors and so on. Certainly there's a role for that, and probably a number of other strategies, because there isn't one route to which we're going to achieve this. It's going to be a multitude of strategies and tactics in different countries and at the regional and global level. And that's what we're working and organizing towards as Fight Inequality Alliance, and hopefully working with an increasing number of others, because there isn't a clear, I mean, others said this articulately, there isn't a clear, clean, linear, step-by-step route to what we're talking about. It's not something we can put into a log frame and project manage in a nice, clean, orderly fashion. It will be quite messy, but certainly strikes amongst workers would be one very powerful tactic. Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Jenny. And now Surya ji and then Kaiser sir.
Thank you. I will respond to two questions. Let me start with Andy's question in terms of how do we collaborate better. I think we can collaborate better by adopting some alternative strategies. Let us take this webinar as an example. We are about, let us say, 30, 40 people talking in English. So what are we talking about here, right? So I think we need to talk in non-English. If we need to really connect with masses and establish collaboration with them, so I think we need to find, Farooq Saab, ways where we can talk to them on the streets, through plays and things like that in their local languages and dialect, right? So how do we take, like this is a conversation amongst the privilege. Let me put it very, very honestly, right? So we are fighting against the system, but we are the privileged ones who are trying to fight this fight. So I think that could be one way, that how do we go to the ground level in terms of collaborations, in terms of that. And then we need to speak their language, their discourse, their needs, rather than we articulating what they want, rather than we need to be informed by them. The second is, I think we can use the power of technology better in terms of collaboration. And I think there is a role for mass movements and community groups and civil society organizations to use technology better and build those collaborations. And I will say build those collaborations outside the UN system, outside the state-based processes, and create those alternatives outside the formal mechanism, because formal mechanisms have those very limited and constrained structures. And I think they constrain consciously the collaborations not to be very transformative. Let us say if you want to collaborate within the UN system, there are limits. And I think those limits are not going to allow the collaboration to be very ambitious because there will be limits on that. Now, in terms of Mudabir's question, in terms of the types of inequality that you're alluding to, and what should UN do, the gulf between rich and poor, and the inequality challenges which are more immediate plus, let us say, far-fetched, I think they are all connected. And I think UN does a lot of discussion about these issues, but UN is not proving to be very effective. And it's not effective precisely because states do not want UN to be effective. UN is a state-based institution primarily. And many of these governments have a vested interest in not having an institution which is effective, because there is a conflict of interest as far as I can see it. Definitely people's movement, and that's where the workers' movement that you talked about, the collective action will be very, very powerful in my view. But I also see a risk of divide and rule, because there are many workers who need to work every day to have food on their table. Otherwise, they cannot survive. So how do we ensure that these workers are able to sustain that protest or a strike where they may not get any wages? And how do we deal with the informal economy? Or those, because when we talk about trade unions and the workers' force, often we're talking about the formal collective bargaining institutions, but 60 to 70 to 80% economies in many countries are informal economies and home-based. So I think there are those challenges we need to deal with. I agree with Jenny, there is no one silver bullet. We need to apply multiple strategies and also adapt strategies. If something is not working, we need to change to something different that could be more effective, learn from peers. What works in one country may not work in another country. So I think it has to be a very dynamic fight for transformation. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Kaiser Bengali ji, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think what Surya ji just said is also what I was trying to say, that we have to articulate ourselves in the language of the people. And I'll give an example of how I do it. I do a lot of speaking. And very recently, I went to a very elite school to speak to students. And I talked about, in a different way, the issue of inequality, not directly, but that's what I touched. And I said, do you realize that your tuition per child that your parents pay is 3 times the salary of the chowkidar of the school, the guard of the school. And the child of that school will never be admitted into this school. You know, so you talk in very practical terms from their everyday lives, and it matters. It rings a bell. On the labor front, I think we need to realize that trade unions, as we knew them traditionally, no longer exist. I think technology has turned blue-collar workers into white-collar workers. The industrial process has decentralized. There are no longer any large factories where 10, 20, 30,000 workers work in one place. Everybody all citizens should be treated as labor, and I think the state has to take responsibility for social security. We can't have individual factories providing social security. So the whole concept of labor has to change. We will never have the old trade unions. Even trade my own experience with trade unions is that formal trade unions don't want to bring informal labor into their fold.
That's right.
If they do secure some benefits out of bargaining, they don't want to share that benefit with a larger pool. So there is a resistance from within trade unions. And I think this is what I think Suryaji also referred to, that everything is not homogeneous at our end also. So we agreed. I think there is a common consensus between all of us that this is a multifaceted struggle and a multifaceted problem. We need to, and we have to be tactical within a strategic framework.
Thank you, Kaiser Sahab. Now we will end this. I'll just take up question of Muhammad Safdar, which is in Q&A, and I will go through. I will read it. Inequalities are at all levels in Pakistan, in all walks of life. In recent times, our farmers are facing a very difficult and survival situation as they are not getting fair crops rate. They have massive crop production and wheat, and now in race, but the wheat stock is also at their homes just because they are not getting fair rates as fixed by the government. As Pakistan is an agriculture dependent country, the circulation of money has become almost at dead end. Dead side, this challenging situation is contributing great part in spreading inequality at grassroots level. What is the way forward for this situation to deal with? We have several more questions. We will deal with them in that, but I will just like to say that Suryaji, we are here in speaking English, and these are our activists and leaders who have joined this, and they will be using this information and this motivation and this sort of discussion in their own languages to their own organizations. I got a lot of inspiration today from the talk, and we will not be speaking in our public rallies in English. We will be speaking in Punjabi, we will be speaking in Urdu and our own languages. And that's what I did last week. Over 2,000 peasants got together at Jhang district, and we spoke in Punjabi language, we spoke in the local native language, and it was very well received. So the main purpose of webinar is really to equip our activists and social and political leaders and those who motivators to bring this message forward to their own organization and take this up. And I thank you very much, Jenny Rex, Kaise Bengali, and Suryaji, and also all our participants who remained here for full hour and a half here, which is normally not the case. Although there was not many here, around 40 altogether, but still I know some of them are leaders in their own movements, and I hope this webinar will motivate them to further in their fight against inequalities. Thank you very much for all of you. We end this webinar over here.